Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening session of Divine Embrace Moments. I was asked by my father to take this evening session, so I am very honored and very grateful to do that. So tonight I am going to go straight into it. I'm going to be reading from Matthew chapter 9. This is one of my favorite miracles that Jesus has ever done, just because it depicts his heart so beautifully. So let's get started. It says, Jesus stepped into a boat, crossed over, and came to his own town. Some men brought to him a paralyzed man lying on a mat. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the man, "My son, be encouraged, your sins are forgiven." At this, some of the teachers of the law said to themselves, "This fellow is blaspheming." Knowing their hearts, Jesus said, "Why do you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts? Which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he said to the paralyzed man, "Get up, take your mat and go home." And the man immediately got up, took his mat and went home. So here's this beautiful image of this man that's been paralyzed for years and years, if not his whole life, being carried to Jesus on what the Bible describes as a sleeping mat by his friends, who's showing such beautiful signs of faith. And Jesus recognizes this man's friend's faith, and he is taken aback. And just to give a background history on people that had leprosy and people that were born paraplegic or born with sicknesses, they were rejected by their family, by their communities. They were abandoned, because back in the day, if you had a son that was born with a sickness, a son that was born with either leprosy or paralyzed, you were seen as someone that was cursed. God hates you. God cursed you, God cursed your family. And many parents that give birth to a child with either leprosy or was paralyzed, many of them would either disown the child because it was seen as a disgrace by leaders, by high authority people. They wanted to keep their status, so it was seen as best to deny the child. And this young man that was on the sleeping mat because he was paralyzed for years was most likely abandoned by his family, and it's easily depicted by the sleeping mat. He had no place to stay, and his friends became his family, basically. Some translations describe it as people that just carried him. So maybe it wasn't friends, maybe it was just random people on the road that wanted him healed. And Jesus, what's so beautiful about this is Jesus, being the beautiful man that he is, instead of saying "be healed" as his first two words, he says, "My son, be encouraged, your sins are forgiven." He says, "My son." And I don't know if this man was probably confused. Why is Jesus calling me my son? But Jesus says, "My son." And many people, these religious leaders, are saying, how can you say to this man, number one, that he's your son, and number two, that his sins are forgiven? How can you tell this man that his sins are forgiven? But Jesus knew that what would it profit this man if he was to be healed and walk out of here on his 2 feet, but still be paralyzed in his heart and in his mind? What would it profit him if I was to heal him from being paralyzed his whole life, but he still walks around paralyzed in his heart? Because Jesus knew this man's story. He knew that this man was on this mat with a heavy heart of abandonment, a heavy heart of rejection, a heavy heart of knowing that no one sees me, no one loves me. And maybe many people have told him that God hates you because you are paralyzed. You must be cursed by God. And so he's probably grown up his entire life thinking that God hates him. But Jesus knew his story. Jesus knew that you are seen by a Father that loves you, by a Father that affirms of you. And I want to tell you that you are seen, you are known. Be encouraged, your sins are forgiven. And it must have echoed in his heart for months. And I can only imagine when words rippled throughout the city after Jesus meets with Mary after he is risen. And Jesus sees Mary outside of his tomb, and Jesus says, I am going to my Father, who is also your Father. Tell the world that I am risen. And Mary goes and she tells one household, and the other household tells another household. And I can only imagine this once paraplegic man hears these words that Jesus himself said, I am going to my Father, who is also your Father. And it must have echoed in his spirit that it was God himself telling him, my son, be encouraged, your sins are forgiven. It was God himself that looked at this man and said, you are known, and I am fully aware that you are loved by me. I know you, I knew you, I formed you. Jesus wanted this man to know that before he was ever abandoned by the world, he was found in the arms of a loving Father. So I don't know who is watching this that may feel paralyzed. If something that is paralyzing you for years, and you've been sleeping on this mat of shame, of this mat of guilt, this mat of condemnation. There's this beautiful image that I or the study that changed my life that I heard of years ago, where this scientist put fleas in a container, and obviously you close the container, and these, I don't have a container with me, but these fleas ended up only obviously hopping to the height of the container, to the lid. And so after a few weeks, the scientist took off the lid, but these fleas still jumped to the same height as they did when the lid was still on the container. They didn't know that they could jump higher. And this is what the enemy does. Knowing that Jesus has paid the price for our victory, the price for our sonship to be found and fully known by an ever-loving and ever-knowing Father, he makes us think that we have to live below the belt of resurrection, below the belt of victory. And I don't know who you are, but Jesus has torn the veil for us to live a mindset of victory. So I don't know what is paralyzing you, what thought. Even what took me back was when the Pharisees told Jesus, you are blaspheming. And Jesus looks at the Pharisees and says, why do you entertain such evil thoughts in your hearts? And I'm coming to tell you, why do you entertain evil thoughts of not enough, evil thoughts of I will always be subject to this disease, I will always be subject to shame, that I'm never going to be enough, I will never amount to anything? Why do you entertain such evil thoughts? Bill Johnson says, I can't afford to have a thought in my mind of myself that Jesus doesn't have in his mind about me. So I want to challenge you. What is it that's paralyzing you? What is it that has you bound? Maybe it's this virus, and you wanted to be farther along in your career. You had all these plans, financial plans. And I just feel in my heart that Jesus is saying, what would it profit you if I was to restore the land like I promise you? But you still walk around in fear, as if the virus is still here. What would it profit you if I was to heal your body, but you still walk around like a paralyzed man? Tonight, Jesus is saying, my son, my daughter, be encouraged. Be encouraged. Your sins are forgiven. I hold nothing against you. My victory is your victory. My death and resurrection is your death and resurrection. You have a right to step out of that grave. You have a right to break free from your box of being paralyzed. Jesus says something. Jesus tells the man, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And I asked Jesus, I said, why would you tell this man to take his mat with him? This mat only depicts all the years of being bound, all the years of being a slave to rejection and abandonment. Why would you tell him to take his mat with him? And Jesus tells me, he says, because Tehila, I wanted him to carry that mat as a testament that it's no longer a depiction of all the years of being bound. It is now a depiction of his oneness with me, of his victory through my power, of his adoption into the kingdom of heaven, that he will always be found, that before he was lost and abandoned by his family, he was found in the everlasting arms of a Father. So I want to tell each and every one of you, it's time to jump higher than the mold the enemy has put on you. Stop entertaining those thoughts that are contradictory to the thoughts that God says and thinks about you. They are not evil, but they are thoughts of hope and future and love and connection and acceptance. Walk in victory. I will echo Jesus' words to that paraplegic, paralyzed man and say, my son, my daughter, be encouraged. Your sins are forgiven.